This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show, and our Moonlighter for today is the voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin. Now, Gary has been the voice of the Hawkeyes for both basketball and football since 1996 when he took over for the legendary Jim Zabel. Now, I met Gary a couple of years ago, actually at the 30th anniversary of the movie Field of Dreams at the Field of Dreams. Gary was doing the play-by-play for the celebrity softball game that I was playing in. Now, I wasn't on the celebrity team, of course, but I was playing with the ghost players and actually dressed as Moonlight Graham from the movie Field of Dreams. And Gary that night, I'll never forget it because it was such a fun night with, Iowans at the Field of Dreams and especially Dubuque County folks and baseball folks. The beer was flowing. Gary was great on the mic. He had the whole crowd into the game and laughing, having a ton of fun. And I thought, man, it'd be really fun to get Gary Dolphin on the show because I bet he has some great insights into baseball over in the Dubuque area, into the Field of Dreams, because he was born and raised in Cascade, Iowa, which is partially in Dubuque County, but he has lived mostly his entire life over in the eastern side of the state. And I thought it might be a good time to have Gary on the show because I noticed that he is the keynote speaker for the upcoming Iowa Catholic Men's Conference on May 22nd. So shameless plug for the Iowa Catholic Men's Conference. If you're in Iowa and you're a Catholic man and you have nothing to do on Saturday morning of May 22nd in downtown Des Moines, there is a men's conference where Gary Dolphin will be the keynote speaker. But before that, you got to listen to our podcast today. And I had fun with this one just because Gary Dolphin's one of those guys where when you hear his voice, at least if you're from Iowa, it takes you to, AM radio and listen to sports on the radio. And the guy's a fantastic storyteller. He's a great communicator. And so it's just fun having guys like that on the podcast because he's a pro. The guy's a pro's pro. And so this one was really fun. And if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast. And we would love it if you left us a 5-star review. You can also follow the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. So enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter, Gary Dolphin.
You and I actually met each other a couple of years ago at the Field of Dreams. It was the 30th anniversary of the Field of Dreams a couple of years back. And if you remember,
was that the softball game? I was emceeing that.
You were emceeing the softball game. I was actually dressed in Moonlight Graham's uniform from the movie. And I was playing with the ghost players. And I got to think that was probably, the most right up your alley thing ever, right? You're emceeing Saturday night at the Field of Dreams. You got a Miller Lite in your hand, and it's just all Dubuque County baseball people all around you. You remember that evening?
Oh, I sure do. I mean, Dallas Clark, Tim Dwight. I mean, all these great players, Iowa State players, and Dubuque County is baseball. I mean, every town has a team. Every small Cascade to Holy Cross to Rickardsville, all these little town teams. That was preeminent for when they were picking movie sites. That had a lot to do with selecting Dyersville and Dubuque. Most of the scenes, the in-town scenes, like in Boston, they were shot in downtown Dubuque at those 150-year-old buildings. And then in Galena, Moonlight Graham's walk down there with the fog, the mist fans at 3 a.m. I went over and watched that. They had to do about 20 takes on that because they picked 3:15 in the morning because they needed dead silence. Well, as you know, Highway 20 is like 3 blocks from downtown. So every time Lancaster get about halfway through the eerie music and the mist, you'd hear this truck downshifting going up this hill. So it took them I don't think they blocked the road off. They couldn't do that legally, but they finally got the take in. But that was so much fun being around that. And I met Costner. They were all staying over at the Galena Territory at Eagle Ridge. And so at the time, the general manager is a good buddy of mine. John Osmanski was his name. And And I'd run over on occasion, and he and I just run out and play 9 holes, the two of us. And so we're on the back 9 at the North Course one afternoon about 3:00, and the 12th hole's a long par 4. We hit our drives, and we're driving up to it, and we're getting out of the cart, and I hear this, "Hey, John, hey, John," this guy yelling from through the trees, this huge deck, beautiful home up on the knob, and he knew right away who it was. I had no idea. And it's a guy bareback, bare chested, I could see, in just a pair of shorts. And he's got a can of beer. And he said, "Come on up, have a beer." And I said, "Who's that?" He goes, "Well, let's hit our shots. We'll drive up there, I'll tell you." So we hit our shots, and there's nobody else on the course. So we drive up there. Here it's Costner. And he's sitting out on the deck. They got a day off, sitting on the deck with a cooler full of beer. And just a great guy. It's the only time I ever met him. But they all stayed there. So there was, James Earl Jones. Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah. God, what a treat he was. He'd sneak over to the Greyhound Park. He loves to bet the dogs. And he'd sneak over at night. He'd get they were going to send a limo. No, I don't want a limo. I want to be, unpretentious. So they'd, send an old guy in a pickup truck to drive him over to Greyhound Park in Dubuque, and they'd sneak him in through the kennels and up the back way, and he'd sit in a separate suite in the press box, and he'd bet the dogs. And when that movie concluded, to this day, as far as I know, to this day, he still has a guy phone his bets in every day to Greyhound Park for during the season. I mean, that's just I could write a book just on Field of Dreams. But now, how did I meet? Did you come up and introduce yourself, or what was the deal? Because we had that little picnic thing going up on the hillside.
That's right. It was during that picnic. We came up and we talked briefly while I was up there. And
so how are you connected with the Ghost players?
So my old man and Keith Ray are good buddies, and my
dad
players for a bunch of years, and so I know Keith and those guys, and I kind of helped put some of that together that night.
Oh, good for you!
Of those players on the show, right? Like the Tim Whites and the Adam Haluskas and the Greg Bruners we've had here on this podcast. And then, of course, I got to wear the Moonlight Graham uniform, which was a real treat.
It's a great movie. It really struck a nerve with America. And if you love baseball, who hasn't thrown with their dad? And exactly. I really took it personal. My dad died when he was 36, suddenly of a heart attack. And so at the end of that movie, when he and what's his name?
Dwyer Brown.
Dwyer Brown. Hey, Dad, you want to play catch? Want to have a game of catch? That just brings tears to my eyes every time I see it, because my dad obviously was a great baseball fan, grew up a Yankee fan. And so I don't know if I'm going to find my way into that August 12th or 13th game this year if they have it. But I know the young guy that runs the place out there real well. But that's all controlled by Major League Baseball, all those, what few tickets there are. So anyway.
Yeah. So before we get to the men's conference, I do want to bring up that you're, obviously a Dubuque County guy from Cascade.
Yeah.
Some of the legendary athletes from Cascade. You got Colin Ray actually went to Cascade, but he's from like Bernard. He's been on the podcast. Greg McDermott, of course, Creighton basketball coach. You tell me in an email as we're setting this up that you're related to both of these guys?
I am. If I got it right, Greg's grandmother and my grandmother were both Dolphins. So I think we'd be like, it'd be distant. It'd be second or third cousin. Colin's a lot closer relation. His mother and I are first cousins. In other words, his grandmother and my mom were sisters. So I've watched Colin grow up and become the athlete and the player and the competitor that he is. Of course, McDermott, I've known Mac for. I was better friends. I didn't know Greg. I was gone when Greg was growing up. Greg played baseball with my brother. They went to the state tournament one year. It was Cascade High School. Greg, of course, Greg and I played for the same high school coach, Al Marshall. And then I've interviewed him thousands of times over his coaching career. And then there's Red Faber.
Obviously, Red Faber, the Hall of Famer.
The Hall of Famer, Red Faber. He's back turn of the century, but he's part of that era where I think he pitched in all 4 wins of the World Series for the White Sox when they beat the Giants, and I don't know what it was, 1917, 1918. That's very Field of Dreams like. So Cascade has a rich, and McDermott, by the way, was a hell of a baseball player. Now, it's not often you see a 6'10" first baseman, but who's going to run? Who's going to run into him or get in his way? Mac was a heck of a baseball player. I mean, he was a terrific athlete. I'm sure there's some names I'm forgetting from Cascade, but
well, I played with a bunch of those guys in college. Like I played with some Cascade guys. I played with a bunch of Dubuque County guys. Baseball.
Where did you play college?
I played over at UNI, and so I played for Heller at UNI in the last kind of years of the program over there.
One of my favorite guys, Heller.
He's the best.
And what a great coach. I mean, what he's doing this year with that team, I mean, they're starting to hit the ball now.
Oh, yeah.
And he I had him on our Fight for Iowa podcast a few weeks back, and he was so down about, he thought the young pitchers would be coming along better. And they have. But, he takes everything so personal. I said, Rick, just relax. Geez. I mean, for him to have the Hawks competing for postseason berths every year, against the Michigans and the Ohio States and the Indianas, who have traditionally strong programs.
I don't think a lot of people thought what he's done at Iowa was possible before he got there.
I mean, I've seen the facilities, the baseball stadiums and facilities at Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana. Michigan. Indiana just built this phenomenal diamond. He's an Iowa farmer.
About Coach Heller, he's as loyal of a guy as you'll ever see.
He is.
And, he might not be if you and I still had a program today and they were paying him over there, he'd still be at UNI just because he's as loyal as they come.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing the only reason he left Indiana State was to come to Iowa, come back to Iowa. But he's a hell of a recruiter. And of course, Marty Sutherland is a friend of yours truly. And I was just going to say, there's another Cascade guy. His mother was a Simon. So that's where where he's getting his ability. And part of that, and that was the Simon family that, what's his name, played at Iowa, just big muscular kid who could just hit the ball. There was Dave Simon. There's three brothers that were just phenomenal talented baseball players. In fact, their kids are now playing for the Reds. Cascade.
Yeah, I want to say Marty took me. Marty was my coach at UNI, and then he also took me deep. I was pitching for the White Hawks at the
Dyersville
tournament. Marty took me deep, and then Simon also took me deep in the same game about 15 years ago. So, I've taken my lumps against the Cascade Reds.
Well, Dyersville Cascade is somewhat competitive, as you know.
Yeah.
So we'll just leave it at that. Yeah. It's the Germans versus the Irish there. But no, it's Dubuque County is so special for baseball. And, what a coup for Major League Baseball to come to the Lansing farm in August. I mean, hopefully they pull it off this year, but it's going to be something. It's going to be great exposure for tourism. And, Keith deserves that. Keith has worked his buns off on that and so many other projects around Dubuque and around Dubuque County. So
this upcoming Catholic Men's Conference, Dubuque County for as long as I've been alive has always been like baseball, beer, and the Catholic Church, right? Like that's
pretty close. That's pretty close. You forgot bingo.
And bingo. But, there's an upcoming Iowa Catholic Men's Conference here in a couple of weeks, and you are a part of that. And what I was surprised with, Gary, is that you're not the MC of this event. You're the keynote speaker of it. Your faith must be so important to you to be able to kind of speak on that, not just as a master of ceremonies because you're a Catholic man. Do you do this often, speaking at Catholic events?
I do not, Tim. And the fact that I'm the keynote speaker also tells you that, per usual, the Catholics don't have a big budget to work with. So I come pretty reasonably priced, as they say, maybe a Casey's gas gift card. But that said, no, I have emceed the Catholic Men's Conference in Cedar Rapids in the Archdiocese of Dubuque a couple times over the years, and offered some thoughts on my upbringing in little old Cascade, Iowa, which I think when I was raised in Cascade, it probably was 98% Irish and German Catholic. And Dubuque and Dubuque County is not that number anymore, but it's still probably in the 70% range. We certainly have diversified in many ways, including religiously speaking. So when I got a call from, honestly, Bishop Johnson, I've known Bishop William Johnson. He's been a good friend of mine for a lot of years. He cut his teeth, he's a cyclone from Ames who cut his teeth in the Dubuque Diocese, and an incredible human being, aside from being a man of the cloth. I've attended many of his masses at Loras College. I've heard him speak any number of times. Very eloquent, gifted speaker, and has been has had a meteoric rise, I think, in the eyes of the Pope and certainly in the state of Iowa for a number of years. So I was so delighted and thrilled when he was appointed Bishop of Des Moines, because I knew that he was not only going to continue that diocese on an upward plane, but be such a phenomenal representative, an articulate representative of the 80 or 85 parishes, whatever it is, in the Des Moines Diocese. And so when I call him Bishop Bill, and I do that affectionately, when he called, there's no way I'm going to turn him down. And I said, "You sure you want me as a keynote speaker?" "Oh, yes. Oh, yes." Now, he's heard me talk too. And, I've got to really edit my material for this May 22nd appearance. But, I plan to talk about my upbringing in small town Iowa, the death of my father at a very early age, and how important the Catholic Church was at that time. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I was 14 at the time. The youngest was 2. And the next day, when after our father passed quickly or suddenly, the next day, here's Catholic Charities knocking at the door with food and clothes and gift certificates. And I'd never heard of Catholic Charities. And so I learned a lot about Catholic Charities and their involvement through the church. And so that really made an impression on me. And I think it's had a lot to do with my faith since then.
It seems like nowadays, the church has changed a lot especially in your lifetime, but especially over, the past 20 or 30 years. How has it, in your perspective, changed, since that time when your father passed and you're a kid to where we're at today?
The two obvious points to your question, or answers to your question, is it's become much more liberal. I grew up in the 60s, attended grade school, Catholic grade school and high school in the 60s. And I remember how, the do's and don'ts of the Catholic Church were pretty specific. So I would think now, abortion has been a game changer, a life changer for many families in the Catholic Church. So I would think the liberal turn or switch, which is really, you could say that about society, which is, I think, good and bad in certain circles. The other component there is a lot of young people now do not attend Mass, do not really follow the Catholic Church. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Now, I think I've noticed the vocation numbers are going up. That's a great sign. And I think it's something that young folks, when I say young, I'm talking, post high school through, the early 30s, the impressionable years of religious faith. And I think with more younger priests now, at least that I'm seeing in my travels around the country and around Iowa, I think young folks can identify with that. And there is a slight trend of young people of that age group coming back to the church, or at least starting to attend Mass, younger families. And I think that's encouraging. But I would say those two areas, just the more liberal thought process from Rome on down, and then young folks, young adults trickling back to the Catholic Church. We've got to have something to hang on to where religious values are concerned, and that's great to see.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, people in my parents' generation and maybe your generation, they grew up kind of always, this was just part of who they were, right? Part of their heritage was not only, maybe they're Irish or German, but they're also Catholic. And then kind of that next generation, people that might be 40 or 50 years old today, it was a little bit disillusioned because their parents might have came out of the 60s and 70s. And now in kind of my generation and younger, it's people that are more trying to figure out like, what is truth, right? What are we actually doing here? And I think there's more people in kind of my generation, maybe thinking for themselves as far as their faith goes, it's in search of truth, that I think is leading them back to the Catholic Church and to other churches as well. But maybe in that previous generation, there was more people that just kind of got disillusioned by faith. And so at least kind of in my friend group, I see more and more people kind of going back to Mass, to your point, and young families going back to it because, really there's a need for it. Like our society is kind of in search of God and in truth, and people are trying to find that through their careers or through yoga or through golf or through sports or through social media. And all of those things are fruitless, right? Because they're all trying to solve the God equation. And only one thing can do that, and that is God, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned one component there in your comment a moment ago about social media and how social media has changed the world. Many of it for the negative, but certainly some for the positive. And you can just, if you Google Jesus Christ right now, you'll have a plethora of information, thought processes, but a lot of good in what comes forward. And your great grandparents, my grandparents, my folks, your great great grandparents grew up in a very strict environment where the Catholic Church is concerned. And I think that kind of religious discipline was fantastic for them and for me growing up in the 60s. My mom attended daily Mass. I've attended daily Mass for any number of years. I can't remember how many, but it's important to me. The bottom line with me is I know Jesus is the reason I've had any success in broadcasting, in public speaking, in raising a family. I've got 3 grandkids now, and they're all beautiful and they're healthy. And I know the good Lord is a big part of that, is a primary reason for the good fortune. We've had tragedy in our lives, but God has a plan. Jesus Christ has a plan, and it all is for the better. Ultimately, on the last day we take our breaths, and the great coach Johnny Wooden. I don't think Coach Wooden was Catholic. Doesn't matter, but he was a deeply religious man. You could tell that. Not only was he a great coach, maybe the greatest to ever patrol the sidelines, but on the only opportunity I had to interview Coach Wooden, it was at the Wooden Classic in Indianapolis back in the early 2000s. And the Hawks, Steve Alford was the coach. Steve is a devoutly religious man. And we had a great conversation in the lobby of the hotel. And I said, Coach, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions on tape that I can run at halftime? Oh, sure, no problem. Now, he was probably 92 or 3 at the time. So there isn't much that he hadn't seen. He grew up on a dirt floor south of Lafayette, Indiana, and became a consensus All-American player at Purdue back in the 30s, grew up in the Depression, and look what he turned himself into. And I tell young people all the time, that's probably the best example I can give you, is don't ever doubt yourself or your abilities. Look at read about the life of Coach Johnny Wooden. So in the end, I said, and he gave me a phenomenal interview. At the end, I said, Coach, this has been such a thrill for me personally, and somewhat selfishly, because I've admired you, how you handled Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Bill Walton to Gail Goodrich to all these great players, Walt Hazzard, and on and on and on. I said, what is your basic message? What is your basic philosophy in life? He said, well, that's simple. He said, when you get back home to Iowa, he said, tomorrow I want you to drive to the nearest graveyard. And I'm thinking, where's he going with this? And he said, walk up to any headstone and look at the name and visualize what that person might have been like. And he said, what do you see on that headstone? You usually see an insignia of some kind of that person's preference, whether it's sports or whether it's everyday life. But he said, primarily look at the dates. You have the date of birth and you have the date of death. And then look at the dash in between the date of birth and the date of death. He said, that dash is your life. So, Gary, what are you going to do with your dash today? And that was it. So I tell young people all the time, I said, the next time you're at a graveyard, Doesn't matter if it's a relative or somebody you have no idea who it was, but you visualize what they did with their dash in their lifetime. So part of my everyday life is, making that dash as positive as I can.
Well, I appreciate you spending a little bit of your dash today talking to us here on the Moonlight Graham Show, Gary. This has been a treat for me, especially as, like I said, I saw your name on the upcoming Iowa Men's Conference, and I thought, I'm curious to talk to Gary not only a little bit about sports, but also about his faith as that's coming up. And I look forward to seeing you there here in a couple of weeks. And hey, maybe if we are together at the Field of Dreams on August 12th, let's meet up for a beer too. I'd enjoy that.
We do have beer in Dubuque County, Tim, as you well know, but I've admired your career, your talents, and happy to be on with you today. We both have extended our dash a little bit today, and I look forward to seeing you in Des Moines on the 22nd.
Sounds good, Gary. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet, Timmy.
Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.